Hi. So I'm just going to do a quick 10 minutes where I hop on here before I go get my salad. And this section that I'm about to read is particularly near and dear to my heart. Yesterday I read from, so in chapter 3, parallax, and ambiguity, which I particularly like. But so I'm just going to jump right in. Got 10 minutes, and I want to give you the best that I have for right now. So this is page 45, and this is natural rhythms, and it starts out with cycles. So the patterns we follow with calendars and clocks track the cycles of nature, specifically the cycles that are connected to Earth and its relationship with the cosmos. After all, we are made of star stuff. We're deeply affected by the natural world because we're a part of it. We experience predictable patterns, seasons, day and night, and days containing a ratio of light and dark that predictably shifts with the time of year, longer days in summer, longer nights in winters. But again, when night falls in our lives, we tend to forget that it's always darkest before the dawn. Regardless of how many times we've experienced dark times, the dawn always comes. So the heading here is ebbs and flows, highs and lows, predictably unpredictable. So in chapter 1, I briefly discuss Ayurveda and states of tamas, rest, rajas, action, and sattva, reflection. As long as we're alive, we cycle through all three states, and as much as we may try to distance ourselves from this, our bodies are natural. The earthly, low energy tamasic state can be profoundly uncomfortable when we're from cultures in which work and accomplishment are heavily emphasized and so-called laziness is stigmatized. But no matter how unhappy or low energy we may be now, we will be energetic and happy again. And the cycle continues as long as we're alive. This is an assurance in life that ebb and flow rhythms are reliable. If we can ride the waves with a sense of curiosity while we experience the ups and downs, we can become relatively peaceful about the fluctuations. Our up and down cycles are complementary opposites that support each other in the homeostasis of life. The truth is that nothing lasts forever, except perhaps the invisible life force within us. And although this realization initially can be depressing, it can also be liberating. When we look back, we can see how hard times taught us lessons and brought us blessings and cycles, such as the rich, full, good times brought us joy, peace, and joy. Your life centers around the expansion and contraction of your heart and the inhale and exhale of your breath. Through good times and bad, you are alive. And whatever may be in front of you, you're where you're meant to be, doing what you're meant to do, and experiencing what you're meant to experience. Most of the pain we experience comes from the tension of believing that things are supposed to be different from what they are. But if you can watch your life and even a slight amount of distance from it, perspective, everything changes. So directionality. Progress is rarely linear. An arrow needs to be pulled back to be launched forward. Still, the perception of regression can lead some archers to drop the slack in their bow and lose sight of the target. If you were to be promoted from a junior position in your company to president, you'd probably be happy and perhaps a little overwhelmed in a good way. But if you were demoted from CEO to president, you might feel slighted and overwhelmed in a bad way. Directionality matters, so much so that people will throw away relationships rather than roll them back, or quit jobs rather than endure the indignity of being placed in a role that technically represents a reduction in status but may be a better fit. The same position can represent gaining ground or losing it. It all depends on where you're coming from. We perceive time through a directionality of a familiar past and an unknown future. Because our brain equates familiarity with safety, the devil we know, the past, can have a rip current's pull. Whenever we do something new, the future, we have deep reflexes that set off alarms signaling danger. Nostalgia is a past sanitized of its previous uncertainty. Your future is infinite and unknowable. Although this may sound wonderful in principle, the deep survival reflexes that have been doing such a nice job of keeping you alive are not particularly excited about uncertainty. The reflexive lizard brain speaks softly and carries a big stick, while the executive functioning logical part of our brain seeks forward motion but gets steered off course by the wonky wheel of subconscious programming and will look for a culprit, often placing blame on itself for not understanding underlying influences. This push pull force is the internal conflict of survival and progress. And although progress continues to win the long game, it loses many battles along the way. That's good. All right, two directions, moving through the hubs. There are two primary directions that we navigate within our hubs. In part two of the Parinama method, I focus on the bottom up approach towards greater self awareness, starting from the first hub, chapter 4, have, and progressing through the seventh hub, chapter 10, know, in chronological correspondence with the first 21 years of life, see chapter 11. The opposite and complementary direction is the top-down approach of conscious creation, finding ideas and bringing them into reality, starting with the expansiveness of the seventh hub is to capture inspiration, and descending all the way down to the practical and grounded first hub. Chapter 12 explores this approach, which can be used as a method of transformation through manifestation in the later phases of life, and is easier to follow and enact after reading part 2. So it's a pretty good chapter. It's like, yeah, this is actually, one of the things that I find with this book is that, is that like I wrote it and it took a very long time. And there were, I kind of describe it as being like 3 phases of the writing of the book, which was the first was like super biographical. Like there's, basically as far as like drafts, there's probably, a whole other version of this book that exists. And the drafts part, and like in those drafts part, the biographical part was a lot of what I expect someone reading this to experience, which is it being very personal about thinking about one's own experiences as they relate to these things. So there was a lot of like my stories in a lot of stories that about other people, and and the things that was kind of limited in that way. And so the next version of the book was actually taking that and lifting it to being a bit more like talking about the principles, but it was really, the tone was a bit kind of pedantic and preachy, which I just think is a natural sort of extension of taking something from being personal to trying to explain it. Um, and so that was obviously like not really the version of the book that I think anyone would really want to read. And then the last part was what you have now, which is where it kind of evened out and integrated a bit, where it's um yeah, where it like the energy of it is less kind of like let me tell you, and a bit more sort of just, I don't know, like the tonality of it I think is like really nice. But yeah, it's really nice to read this, because one of the things I found while I was writing it, this happened, and also it's just happening right now, which is that the content is pretty timeless in some pretty significant and profound ways, which is that like when I read it, when I wrote it, it meant something, and even there are different like stages of writing it. And now when I read it, so even when I was doing the final editing, I would be reading sections that would help me understand how to navigate really like what I was going through while I was actually like finishing the process. And even right now, as I'm reading it, it has an effect on me about thinking um just about where I'm at right now personally. And so I think it's really, there's a lot more that I'll talk about in the future about like writing the book, and that how many people and forces were a part of the process. So it certainly transcends me. in many ways, but that it's still something, it's really along the kind of Toni Morrison notion of like if there's a book that you want that hasn't been written, that you have to write it. So here we are. I'm going to stop for now today, but I thank you so much for coming along. Please like and subscribe. And I look forward to seeing you the next time. Again, thank you so much. All right. Bye.